Thank you for joining us today. I've got Gregory with me today, and we're going to be talking about new ways of training employees to set them up for success. Before we dive into the questions that I have for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Sure. It's nice to be here. My name is Greg Offner, like you heard, and I get the pleasure of working with leading organizations around the world. And as I work with them, what I see is that we put the focus on growth above everything else. So we focus more on bettering the organization, unfortunately, than growing our people. And when we do grow leaders, when we do develop them, it's generally to make them better at their jobs. It's generally job specific, hard skill training. And this is why people aren't passionate about the work that they do. And so when I work with organizations, I help them create real change by helping them improve their people personally as well as professionally. Because here at the Global Performance Institute, we believe that better people become better employees by extension.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me. And I want to take a little bit of what you just said and dive into that idea a little bit more. So you
Okay.
mentioned this idea of how we train our employees with hard skills and
Yes.
being in this environment and working with organizations. Can you dive into what you mean by that a little bit more and maybe what qualifies as a hard skill and what kinds of trends you're seeing in terms of how we prepare our teams for the workforce?
Yeah, so let's call it, instead of hard and soft skills, let's call them technical and tactical. So technical skills, tactical skills. And here's why I say it that way. I went to military school, so I'm going to use the example of a gun, a weapon in the Army. Let's say that you have a handgun. There's a technical skill to operating that particular device, right? How it's put together, how you fire it. But then the tactical skill is how you use it as a weapon in combat. And you can use that in any scenario, in any type of fight. Now, let's apply that to the business world. Technical skills are how you do your job at your company to serve your customer in your industry. But tactical skills are professional skills that can be applied in any job, in any industry. And incidentally, most tactical skills are applicable in life. One of my first jobs was with a company called Cutco. Well, technically, the company was called Vector Marketing, but what we sold were Cutco knives. Now, picture this. You're sitting in a room with 20 strangers, and a man you've never met before, never seen in your life, walks up to the front of the room with the biggest, sharpest knife you've ever seen in your life. Now, in many cases, that would be a scary occurrence, but because we were there for a job interview and we were told that it was going to be to sell knives, I was intrigued. See, I was cooking at a restaurant while I was in college when I went on this interview. I was cooking at a restaurant, so I would use knives regularly. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll learn something here. But what really hooked me into this job was the man in the front of the room with the big sharp knife talked about one of the skills we would learn is how to overcome objections. And he said, have any of you ever asked a girl out on a date and she said no? I was like, he's talking to me. This guy knows me. This is my life. This is my whole college experience, getting shot down on dates. And what I loved about the opportunity for this job was that in running the objection cycle and learning how to turn no's into yeses, that was a skill that I could use it to sell knives, but I could use it for all sorts of other things. And so these organizations that I talked about working with earlier, they're investing tons of money. $300 billion globally is what's invested into employee development. They're investing tons of money into training, but most of it is technical training, what you called hard skills, what we may think of as job-specific training. That's not stuff that we can go and apply in other parts of our lives. It's not stuff that when we're hanging out at the bar or at the barbecue, we're not going to impress our friends with our knowledge of how to work a machine press twice as efficient as we did before, or whatever the job may be. But those skills of resilience, persuasion, communication, those are skills that we can apply everywhere in life. You know, getting a table faster at a restaurant, convincing a cashier to give you that extra 10% off when you're checking out at Home Depot, whatever it is. That's what people want. And so as we enter this new world of work where employees are demanding to be engaged or to be given the freedom to work on their own terms, employers have to compete. And the best way for them to compete is to make their people better, not just to train employees, but to make their people better.
I'm such a fan of analogies. So just the imagery that when you were talking about the difference between technical and tactical skills, that was such a great way of breaking it down and making it something that is easy to attach to. So when we were prepping for this interview, one other idea that you brought up is this idea that a lot of times in a job skill, and even almost in this idea of like going against objections, we're trained to be fault finders.
Mm.
Can you explain and kind of expand on that idea of fault finding and where that might not be the right approach for helping employees?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've never been pulled over by a police officer while driving a car, but I have. And it wasn't to tell me that I was doing a good job. It was to tell me that my tail light was busted and I needed to get it fixed. And oh, by the way, here's a $100 ticket. And you may have gone to the doctors. I know I have once or twice. They generally don't come in and give you a laundry list of what's good within your body. They're kind of telling you what the problem is and how to fix it. Most of us, whether it's through life or through our profession, have been trained to find fault. In fact, salespeople routinely look for the pain with their prospect, and that's where they drill in. They're looking for faults. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's how we live our lives. Where that becomes problematic for us is that when we're assessing situations, when we're looking for opportunities, we're more focused, to use a skiing analogy, since you said you like analogies, we're more focused on the trees than the holes between them. Let me tell you, if you'd ever like to kill yourself on a ski slope while skiing the glades, look at the trees. It's a sure way to hit them. If you want to live and enjoy that crazy experience of skiing through a thicket of trees, then look for the holes between the trees. But we have to condition ourselves to look for those holes. And in life, both professionally and personally, we need to work at that ability, the conditioning, to notice what's going well. Because most of us have been conditioned, like you said, trained fault finders, most of us have been conditioned to look for what's not going well and try to improve upon it. Counterintuitive, one of the best ways to make forward progress, to find improvement, is actually to focus on what's going well and try to build upon that. So when I said trained fault finders in our prep call, that to me is such an important bit of internal programming that we need to reconfigure and that we need to almost pave over for us to truly be successful in this new world. Because as the velocity of change continues to accelerate, it's easier to notice what's going wrong, but it's not always valuable.
So now that we've kind of talked about maybe where we're going wrong in our training avenues, and how I want to dive into how, as an employer or a leader, do you help train your team to be better people and then in turn better employees with this kind of philosophy behind you?
Yeah, well, first is starting with an understanding that people aren't bad, right? But we can always be better. So there's no company I've ever gone into work with that had bad people. There are companies who've had people that can be better. And that's our goal, is to say we can always improve on something. So what are we going to improve on? And the first step when I work with those companies is we go through an analysis, an assessment called the 7 Keys of Success assessment. You can probably see it back there behind me on the board there. So there are 7 key traits that successful people possess that are valuable right now in our current economy. And frankly, hard work isn't always one of them. There are things like curiosity, disruption, or the ability to be comfortable in times of change, energy management, focus, gratitude, attitude, our belief system. So when we identify where the organization is strong in those 7 keys and where the organization has room to improve, we can start to develop a training program that hands these skills to the employees and shows them how to apply them in their current job. We're making them better people, and by extension, they automatically become better employees. Because again, $300 billion having been spent on training, they've got the technical know-how, but it's now the mental flexibility, the grit, the resilience, the gratitude that they need to be successful. And then each training that I do with my clients builds upon one another. So often by starting general, doing the assessment, finding out what's going well, where we can build upon that, how we can leverage that strength, but then also looking to find the area for improvement, what I call the one change that can change everything. We then move the needle just a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. I was talking to a client the other day who said they're looking to bring me in to coach several of their executives. And they said, we've tried coaching before, and we did it, I don't know how long they did it for, but it didn't last. And I said, well, did you ever eat dinner? And they kind of looked at me funny. They said, yeah. I said, well, was that the last meal you ever had? And they laughed, right? Because you have to consistently reinforce this. The biggest, I don't want to say damage done to an organization, but the largest missed opportunity I see within companies that I work with is that they miss a critical step in the development process of their leaders. And you and I probably do this in areas of life. It's something that I am not perfect at, but try to focus on for sure. And it's that we learn the new skill, and then we apply the new skill, but do we practice the skill? It's that in-between part that differentiates musicians that perform at Carnegie Hall from musicians that perform at St. Paul's Parish, during the church carnival. I'm not saying they're bad musicians. I'm just saying they don't belong in Carnegie Hall because they don't rehearse enough. It's not that they don't know how to play the violin, and it's not that they can't get up on stage and perform, but the quality of that performance is not what it could be because they don't take time to rehearse, to practice. You and I were making some jokes before we started recording about the Wisconsin-Penn State football game. Those football players spend a small percentage of their career on the field on game day. Now, I'm a hockey player, and I did the research on this statistic. A professional hockey player through the course of their career spends about 8% of their career in game scenarios, on the ice in a live game. The other 92% is in the strength and conditioning room lifting weights. They're watching film or they're practicing. But yet most professionals, I don't care who you're talking about. You talk about JP Morgan, you talk about Cintas, any company. Most professionals spend 92% of their time in front of a customer. And that's a mistake. It's probably the biggest mistake that organizations make.
You had to bring in the loss of the Badgers into the conversation.
I didn't say they lost. I just said we talked about the game. But yes, the Penn State Nittany Lions did, in fact, emerge victorious.
I can be gracious in my loss, so I will take that. But I do think that that's a really great way of talking about this. And even, something that I do regularly, like presenting. I present to customers. We just got done with our annual conference. Those presentations are probably the presentations that I practice the most because they're going to be done once. Whereas I don't do that as much as I would during normal kind of conversations with customers. And maybe there is opportunity to dive into that a bit further or, take a different lens to what my day-to-day life looks like and use kind of that presentation ready for a main stage approach to a bit more within my day-to-day life as well.
Yeah, and I bet there's people listening to this going, hey, Greg, I think you got it backwards, my man. We actually spend a lot of time at our company. We do training every week, right after our sales meeting. I'm not talking about training. I'm talking about rehearsal. So let's use that example of a musician. A musician practices a piece on their own. They have to learn the nuances, the dynamics, right? The loud, the soft, the speed changes. Every aspect of that piece needs to be known to the musician. They have to have it in their bones. But then they do something that's fantastic, I think. Then they actually get dressed up in the tuxedo that they're going to wear. They go out on the actual stage they're going to perform on, and they run through the piece. Most great musicians will tell you that they envision the audience there. They envision the silence, but that energy as the audience prepares to hear that first sound. And then when they launch into that performance, they've effectively created an additional performance opportunity. So when they go out on stage in front of the real audience, it's the second, third, fourth, fifth time they've done it. It's already well in their bones. See, I bet you practice those speeches, but do you get to practice it on the stage on which you're going to give it? Or do you recreate that, We sometimes in the professional speaking world, I deliver a lot of keynotes at conferences too. We have this vision of, the teddy bears lined up on the bed and delivering that powerful speech to the teddy bears or to the pets. How do we create the pressure that we're going to face in a competitive situation? So it's not just enough to train the skill. We have to practice applying it under pressure. That's what these companies are missing, the rehearsal time. When the NFL teams, college teams, when they go out on the field, they've got a practice team. They're not just running the play against an empty field. They're actually playing against somebody. And if you're in sales, which is where I came from, if in your trainings, your role play isn't harder than scenarios you face with your competition, or I'm sorry, with your customer, you're doing yourself a disservice. And this is where I see companies falling short with their development, is that they teach, maybe they have a mindfulness course come in, but do they rehearse it? It's like I said, do you eat dinner once and that's the last time you'll ever eat dinner?
Then you're starving.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate you joining me and talking through this idea. I think you probably left everybody joining us for the conversation with some food for thought, pun intended there.
Hey.
And I would encourage everybody to reach out to Greg and ask him more questions after this. Engage with him on LinkedIn. You've always, we connected via LinkedIn and some of the videos that specifically talking about this idea and how it pertains to folks that are working in the restaurant industry and hospitality industry, which is near and dear to my heart from where I got started. And that's kind of where this conversation went. But you're also very entertaining in your videos. So I would encourage everybody to check that out as well. But thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful day, everyone.
It's a pleasure. Bye, everybody.
If you're looking for expert tips on how to get started with your transformation or looking to hone in on your approach, make sure that you subscribe to our channel to catch our weekly Digital Transformation Talk series, where we interview experts from around the world on how to make it happen.